The red earth crumbled slowly from the gravedigger's hands, landing on the wooden coffin with a soft, final thud. Chike stood beside the grave, silent, still as a statue. His hands were clenched behind his back. His face gave away nothing. Around him, the villagers cried and wailed. The sound of mourning filled the air like smoke rising into the gray sky. But Chike was not fooled. He knew those cries were for show. They were pretending to grieve, pretending to honor the dead. But deep down, they were glad the lion of Umuagu was finally gone. Chief Okonkwo, Chike's father, was not loved. He was feared. He had taken lands from the poor, seized property at will, and destroyed families who dared to stand in his way. Even in death, his name made people shiver. Chike could feel their stares, cold, sharp, burning with pride and anger. They were already plotting, already thinking of how to take back what was once theirs, and they saw Chike as a weak link, a soft shadow of his father, easy to break. He stood by the grave, but his mind was heavy with thoughts. His father was gone, and with him the fear that had protected their family. Now, Chike was vulnerable. He was 29, with a pregnant wife and a little son just 3 years old. His family looked up to him, but he wasn't sure if he could protect them. Not the way his father had. Chief Okonkwo had built his power through blood, fear, and devotion to one god, Allah Ogbaga, the god of destruction. It was said that Allah Ogbaga only gave favor to those who made great sacrifices. Human or animal, it didn't matter. What mattered was loyalty and blood. Chike had watched his father rise over the years. He remembered the strange nights when his father would leave the compound with the chief priest, heading deep into the forest. He would return before sunrise, quiet, but stronger, darker. Favor comes with sacrifice, his father always said. Without sacrifice, you are nothing before the gods. Chike never forgot those words. But now, those words had become more than lessons. They had become a challenge. How would he gain the favor of the god now that his father was no more? Would Allah Ogbaga even hear him? He knew that if he didn't act quickly, his kinsmen would come like wolves. They would tear apart everything his father left behind: farmland, livestock, even the respect. For 2 days after the burial, Chike said little. He barely ate. He walked the compound in silence, thinking. He watched his son play in the dust, watched Adora, his wife, wince as she carried her belly. She was close to delivering, and she too felt the fear rising around them like smoke from a slow fire. That evening, his younger brother, Ebuka, arrived with his heavily pregnant wife. Ebuka was different, gentler, less concerned with legacy and more with peace. He sat beside Chike quietly for a while before speaking. "Brother, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we give back what our father took." Chike turned sharply to face him. "Give back? Are you mad?" "Some of these people suffered, Chike, you know it. What if this is our chance to change things?" Chike's voice was low but firm. "You are a fool, a disgrace to our father's name. Do you think power is a game? If we start returning things, they will eat us alive." Ebuka looked down. "Then maybe we deserve it." Chike stood and walked away. That night, sleep refused to come. Chike sat outside his hut, watching the moonlight fall across the compound. He felt the shift in the air, something dark, something hollow. His father had always been prepared for war, but now Chike felt like a boy surrounded by enemies. The land, the buildings, the respect, none of it was his, not truly. He had to reclaim it.
A week had passed since the burial. The compound was quiet, but Chike's heart was not. He could barely sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the villagers, cold, watching, waiting. They had not made any move yet, but Chike could feel it, like a silent storm building in the distance. He knew that peace was only pretending. Beneath it, something was shifting. He knew he had to act, but more than that, he needed answers. So early one morning, before the sun had fully risen, Chike walked alone down the forest path, the same path his father had taken many times before. In his hands, he held a healthy black cock, its feathers shining in the dim light. It was his offering, a plea for the god Allah Ogbaga to hear him. The journey felt heavier than before. The trees seemed thicker, the silence deeper, and the weight in his chest heavier. His father used to walk this path boldly, like a king, but Chike's steps were slow, unsure. The shrine stood in a clearing, shaped like a half-moon hut, covered in dried leaves and red symbols. Outside, the chief priest waited, an old man with skin like dry bark and eyes that saw more than what was in front of them. "You have come," the priest said, his voice low and hoarse. "I have come to seek favor. I have come to take my father's place." He handed the black to one of the chief priest's servants. The priest stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "But do you understand what it means to ask the god for favor?" he said. Chike swallowed hard. "My father taught me. Favor comes with sacrifice." The priest shook his head slowly. "There is one thing he did not teach you, because it is not something you teach, it is something you give." Chike's chest tightened. The priest stepped closer, his voice lower, more serious. "Your father made a blood sacrifice, not of animals, of himself." Chike blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "He offered his own life. Years ago, he stood before this very fire and said, 'Let my life be shortened, so my power may grow.' That is why he rose so quickly. That is why no one dared to touch him." Chike's heart pounded. "But he was strong. He ruled for years." The priest nodded. "He was powerful, but the sacrifice came with a price. He was given a set number of years, and when those years ended, he died. Just like that. No illness, no warning." Silence filled the shrine. Chike's lips parted, but no words came out. He had always thought his father's death was strange, so sudden, so final. But now it made sense. The truth sat heavy in his stomach like a stone. He looked down at his own hands, strong but not like his father's, young but holding too much. "I didn't know," he whispered. "He never told me. He didn't want you to know. He wanted you to follow your own path. But now that you are here, the truth must be known." Chike sat still for a while, eyes on the fire. Flames danced, but they brought no warmth. Smoke rose into the air like a spirit leaving the earth. His mind was full. He thought of his wife, Adaora, with her tired eyes and heavy belly. He thought of little Emeka, still too young to understand what death meant. He thought of the blood he had spilled, the prayers he had made. He had come here ready to offer whatever it took, but now he wasn't sure. He stood up slowly, his legs shaking slightly. "Tell the god I will return," he said, "but I must think." The priest said nothing. Chike turned and walked back through the forest, the weight of the truth pressing hard against his chest. He wanted power. He needed protection. But was he ready to trade his life for it? And if he did, who would protect the ones he left behind? The forest behind him grew silent again. But in Chike's heart, a storm had begun, and this time it would not pass quickly.
The days after Chike's return from the shrine were slow and heavy. The winds carried whispers, and the villagers' eyes spoke louder than their mouths. Some greeted him with stiff nods. Others simply looked away. The respect they once showed his father had vanished like smoke after rain. In the marketplace, people no longer stepped aside as he walked by. The butchers no longer offered him the best cuts. Even the palm wine tapper who used to gift him calabashes now simply waved from a distance. Chike felt the shift. But what stung more was the silence of those who once bowed. Now they stood tall around him, speaking in full voice, no longer afraid. He could feel it every time he walked through the village square, eyes boring into his back, some with pity, others with pride. The morning Mazikalu visited, the sky was unusually still. Chike had been tending to his goats when he saw the older man approach with a crooked walking stick and the air of someone who carried stories he wasn't asked to tell. "Kedu, Chike," Mazikalu said, voice smooth like oil over fire. Chike straightened. "Mazikalu, I see you're well." "Ha, well enough for an old tree," the man chuckled. "But trees fall, don't they? Even mighty ones, like your father." Chike said nothing. Mazikalu stepped closer, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I heard you went to the shrine. Good. You should learn the true ways of the gods now. Maybe come join us, Come and sit under those who understand how to call the gods properly." There was something in the old man's tone, a mocking twist, hidden under friendly words. Chike saw it, felt it. This wasn't a visit of concern. It was a test, a provocation. "I appreciate your concern," Chike said, holding his ground. "But I don't need lessons from men who waited for my father to die before showing their teeth." "Stubborn like your father, but you lack his fire." With that, the old man turned and walked away slowly, humming a song Chike recognized. It was a mocking tune, once sung during the downfall of a proud chief decades ago. That night, Chike sat alone outside his hut, his face lit by the red glow of a small fire. His wife, Adeora, watched him from the doorway, her belly round with their unborn child. She didn't speak. She had learned to read his silence. "I thought they feared me," he muttered, "but they only feared him." Adeora came to his side, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "They fear what they don't understand," she said. "Your father was a storm. You are a man trying to build in the ruin he left behind." Chike stared into the fire. The memory of the chief priest's words returned to him again and again. Your father gave blood, his own. That is why he had power. Chike didn't want to die to gain respect, but every day made it clearer. Without that kind of sacrifice, he would never command the same fear. Later that week, 3 goats were stolen from his farmland. His cousin, Obina, who once kneeled to greet him, now barely looked him in the eye. And the elders? They had stopped inviting him to secret meetings, a silent message, "You are not your father." The final blow came when one of his father's former land tenants, a man named Udochukwu, confronted Chike publicly in the square. "This land your father took from me, it was stolen. I want it back." People gathered, eyes hungry for drama. Chike stood tall, his heart pounding. He could feel the air crackle with judgment. "You dare challenge me?" he asked. "I do. You are not your father," Udochukwu said firmly. "You don't scare us." Chike took a step forward, his fists clenched. He could feel it building, the rage, the shame, the pressure to become what they feared. But in that moment, he didn't speak. He turned and walked away. That night, he slaughtered another cock, this time not for a ritual, but because he needed to remind himself he still had some control. Inside the compound, his son cried. Adeora held the child tightly, staring at Chike with worry in her eyes. He sat beside the fire again, silent, torn. How much of himself would he have to give before they saw him, and how much would be left if they did? He would return to the shrine and do whatever it took to earn the favor of Allah Ogbaga. No sacrifice would be too great, and when he returns, he will be more feared than his father ever was. The people of Umuagu will learn a lesson they would never forget.
This is a story soaked in blood, bound by sacrifice, and haunted by rituals that awakened a generational curse. A tale of love twisted by betrayal and the brutal consequences that followed. Subscribe and turn on your notifications, because with each episode, a heart-pounding truth will be revealed. Welcome to Legends and Myths, where ancient secrets are unearthed and darkness walks among men.